Okay, so I wanted to do another video. This one is going to be specific to um, people of different perspectives of the colorism perspective, basically. So, for example, you know, this is the main reason for me why I talk about colorism so often. Because so many platforms have dark skinned platforms or dark-skinned perspective of colorism. Um, and I wouldn't say all dark-skinned people have that perspective even, because I grew up with my mother, she is, um, I, I perceive my mother to be dark-skinned. She's like Brandy's color, Gabrielle Union's color, and she did not have the perspective that colorism existed. And that was based off of her experience. Never experienced any such thing of colorism. I mean, at all. In fact, many things that people say that lighter skinned people experience, she experienced herself, and vice versa. So, from that perspective, that kind of did influence my perspective of colorism. But, you know, as far as colorism goes, it seems like they always have a voice for the dark-skinned people. They have a voice for the light-skinned people. But most of the time, if brown-skinned people want to talk about colorism, they can only talk about colorism in two ways. And even in those cases, it's very hard to talk about it in two ways. For example, I've kind of shared this in the past, but you know, sometimes people who are darker brown skinned or brown skinned, not light brown skinned specifically, like my complexion, but actually brown skinned, like darker than a paper bag, basically, to some people. They will sometimes align with dark skinned people, and they can speak in dark skinned black people's spaces. With a caveat, not always, but most of the time they can. Often, I find that there can't be a perspective of a brown skinned woman without her echoing somebody else's message, basically, especially dark skinned women's messages. And the thing is, when you're light brown skinned, you can never echo a dark skinned black woman's, you know, issues as far as colorism other than certain things. Like, for example, as you can see on my slide, I show photos of these people. Some photos, for example, Nicki Minaj. You will see one photo is of her lighter, one photo of her is, I guess you could say she's kind of dark skinned, kind of dark. There are plenty of photos of Nicki Minaj, for example, where you can see that she has a darker complexion. Now, the thing is, I'm like that, basically. I'm like that, like Stacey Dash is like that. Basically, all the people I posted have the ability to, tan deep enough to get to a darker complexion. And that's a major thing with brown skinned people. They tend to talk about how their experience is when they tan. Now, the thing is, if you don't have that experience, though, and you have a different experience than that, and you actually have your own perspective on the issue of colorism, not specifically similar to light skinned people, but not specifically similar to dark skinned people either. For example, for me, often people, I think, get a little triggered by the fact of my perspective on colorism is I don't experience colorism. I've never experienced colorism ever. Like, When I'm darker skinned, I don't experience colorism. When I'm lighter skinned, I don't experience colorism. I just don't experience colorism, basically. And that's why, for me personally, I've always said that, colorism doesn't exist from my perspective, and I kind of speak from a place of knowing that I've experienced life as a darker skinned person, and I've experienced life as a lighter skinned person. Because it just depends on the season as far as if I'm going to be lighter or darker. And I've talked to people about this, and many of the time they've said, they had the same experience where it didn't matter if they were darker or lighter. With that in mind, I never experienced anything like people thinking I was, for example, my blackness was never questioned as far as being related to white people. My blackness was always questioned as far as, like, being connected to people who aren't white, but they aren't black, basically. Like, I've been accused of being mixed with so many things other than white. Like, I've never been accused of being mixed with white, but other things. And, you get those questions, but generally, it's like you're dark enough to be accepted, kind of thing. But at the same time, when it comes down to, like, preference and things of that nature, you still fall under the category of being preferred. And the thing is with that is kind of like, this part of it is a major thing that I feel both sides prefer no one to talk about. Because it's like, if you look at the image that is generally pushed, it's usually someone in, like different specific, people in the hip hop culture, for example. Many of the women would fall under the lighter complexion, the lighter brown complexion of which I am showing on my slideshow. And, so you kind of have this experience where your image is pushed to some extent, but your image is only pushed for its closeness to something else, which is why it's never really embraced, but it's more so like embraced for everything that it's not. Basically, because if you think of it with colorism, that's the only kind of colorism I understand, basically. And that's usually with black men, generally, and dark-skinned people who are usually men, sometimes women, too. It's different ways, though. But, with colorism, whether you're very light-skinned or if you're light brown or you're, basically lighter than a paper bag. Those technically light skinned people or whatever we want to call them. Red moans, whatever. Um and you know, for me it's always been like I never understood why it was treated like I never understood why it was treated like a better thing. That's my thing. It's like, okay, so a certain image is pushed, but that image is pushed because of everything it's not. Like I said, light skin, for example, is pushed because it's not as dark as dark skinned black people are. It's not pushed for actually being light skinned. It's not pushed for being light caramel complected, or whatever we want to call it. It's pushed for everything it's not. But it's not white. And the reason that lighter skin is pushed just because of its proximity to whiteness. But if you don't have whiteness, then how much of a celebration of yourself is it? Therefore, that's why, for me, I never saw that as a privilege. Also, because I mean, like, I don't really care what black men like. So even when they are colorist and they act like being mixed is better or being lighter skinned is better or looking like you have what they think different features than what they have on their face, then, you get to this point where it really doesn't matter. It's just sad to see mostly because it's like, well, you have some kind of self hate issue. But, you know, I would never entertain such a, you know, um, hierarchy or preference because I don't feel the preference is real because it's still a push to be less black than what you are. Because if you think of it, look at people who are light skinned that are pushed. They are always pushed to look less black than they are. So it's like if you are only celebrated because we can disguise your, then how much is that embracing you? The main thing is disguising you, not basically recognizing your true self, your true blackness. So that's just generally my thoughts on it. It's just like, you know, that's why I've never really seen it as, you know, um, a privilege. But a major thing is that, you know, people always talk about colorism and they act like you can only have two perspectives, like I said. And as I've shared my own, it's kind of like this. Many of the time, people kind of act like you have either dark skinned perspective or light skinned perspective. If you have both sides to it, they don't appreciate that because we tell the story that they don't want to hear. The side of it that is not very comfortable. For example, with dark skinned black people, I can literally be like, well, it's not really any experience that I've had differently for being darker skinned. And I can also say, on the other end, that it's not really embracing or it's not really a privilege when, at the end of the day, light skin is not celebrated because it's only celebrated because whiteness is celebrated. So, whiteness is basically being celebrated through people who are lighter skinned. But we are not being celebrated. So, to me, it's kind of like, you see things through a double mirror. Basically, like you see things through both sides of the argument. And, I think that's why a lot of the time people like to basically try and act like black people who are brown skinned or light brown skinned cannot speak on the topic. And they will try and shut them down and try and make them, go away from talking about that because basically, if you're brown skin, you can basically expose both sides quite easily. At least light brown skin, you can definitely, expose both sides to basically show the truth and rather, bring light skin and dark skin people on a common ground. But a lot of the time, with these people who are colorism warriors, a lot of them like to have a lot of division. Sometimes some lighter skinned people get off on the fact that colorism exists, so then they can feel better about feeling inferior to white people. And then sometimes dark skinned black people feel better about dividing light skin from dark skin because of their own insecurities about being dark skin. So both sides don't want a commonality. That's why they create this division with colorism. And that's why they mostly try to shut down the ones in the middle to talk about this subject because they don't want to find a common ground. And in some cases, it makes them uncomfortable on both sides because of the lighter aspect of it too, because sometimes dark skinned people get a little bit upset about the fact that people who are lighter brown complexion basically benefit more than what they want to realize from other people's self hate. Now, the benefit is a smack in the face, like I said, because they're still being pushed to be something else. But what I'm saying is that they get the whole they get the brunt of the fact that the people that are dark skinned don't like themselves will go to them because they're lighter skinned. But they will go to them under the idea that they can be as less black as they can. So basically, a dark skinned black person will go to someone who is lighter and basically self impose their own self hate on them, which is just not healthy. But, you will see that, like I said, in the media and things of that nature. And people, like I said, they like to avoid talking about that. They don't like to address that only when they're actually talking about like celebrities and the media and stuff, where they see people who are lighter brown and they think that they are benefiting, but don't really want to acknowledge it. So that's why they don't like them talking about that side of it. And the same thing with lighter skinned people is that I've heard this many of the time with lighter skinned people. I think they want it for a select few, but I mean, like, it is what it is. People will see the self-hate of dark-skinned people in different ways. Some brown-skinned people will see it in a way where they're told they're too dark. Some will get it where they're being, pushed to be something other than what they are, like light-skinned people, basically. And others will, I don't know, like maybe I really don't know between light brown and brown skin. I don't I don't know. Is there a complexion between the two? I don't know about them. If there's anything in between that, I don't know. But my point is, it triggers both sides. So it's just like, a lot of the time, both sides try to hush the brown skinned people from talking about colorism, especially light brown skinned people. And personally, for me, it's just like kind of like, I don't know. This is the main reason why I make my channel on colorism because I never really see anybody talking about colorism issues that is of a similar perspective as myself, as far as, complexion and things of that nature. It's always people who are, on the lighter spectrum and they have that perspective, or people who are darker skinned with that perspective. So, yeah, that's just generally all I have to say on that. I know this was longer than what I wanted. Actually, I wanted to make it like 6 minutes or so, but I had more to say. But yeah, thanks for listening. Bye.